Hello and welcome to the recording for GallagherG Modesto. So this case was about a landfill that was jointly owned by the city and county. They both paid equally for it, but the county wanted to manage it. And so it was ran until it was completely full, and which ended in about, I think, the 1970s, if I recall. And then from there, there's later treatment you have to do, such as pumping out the gas that is being created from the decomposing stuff. And you also have to monitor the water table beneath the landfill to make sure that it is not contaminating and leaking into the water table. So the city of Modesto is suing the county for mismanagement, and they're suing for $20 million of previous damages and $20 million for future damages. This did settle within our favor, but for a lot less than the $40 million, and we were representing the city of Modesto. So the first graphic we'll go into is the 04 LFG graph. And this was a comparison of the modeled landfill gas versus the recovered landfill gas and the landfill gas recovery potential. So what was modeled was that there'd be a lot more gas than what was actually recovered. And this red line on the bottom is what was actually recovered. So 20 years after the start of the production of the actual gas within the landfills when we tried to start recovering it. Flares were put in to flare off the gas because it's not worth trying to bottle it up and send it off to a refinery. More flares were added, a lot of fluctuation started happening. And they just wanted to step through at each stage. And all these different events happened within our gas that was produced. And it is projected to still be produced to some degree out even into January of 2030. So in theory, this will just keep going until it reaches zero, which will be many years from now. But we were consistently producing gas less than what was modeled to be recovered, except for these little bits in here. And the reason for this being the county wanted to manage the recovery of the gas, and they had assumed that their wells would have a radius of a couple hundred feet for what they could produce out of the ground, but really they only had a radius of about 40 feet. So there were big gaps in the landfill where the gas was not being recovered from. The second graphic produced is just a tutorial of how a basic landfill works. So you put in your water and landfill gas monitoring probes before you start digging your landfill, so you can at least know what the water table conditions are like, and the vadose zone, which is more or less the soil. That way, if there are already contaminants, you can not be blamed for them down the road. If someone goes and tests the soil and tries to claim that some contaminants from your landfill, you can say, no, it pre-existed before the landfill. So typically, landfills start as large pits, and they're dug down to remain a safe level above groundwater. A liner is put in. It's typically a plastic or rubber sheet, and it's, I think, on the order of a centimeter thick, maybe more. And then the trash is put in, or whatever the refuse may be. And then there's leachate that starts to be produced. Basically, leachate is moisture from the whatever is being thrown away, as well as rainwater being put in. And when these layers of trash are being deposited, these brown lines here are to represent soil that's supposed to be put on top as well. And I think the soil is supposed to be put on daily to help I guess, mixing the trash better with soil, and it helps with decomposing and doesn't have large chunks of stuff that'll just take forever to decompose. And the landfill is filled up, and a little mound is built, and a thick covering of dirt as well as another liner is put on. And the reason for the liner is to help trap gas and to prevent more water and leachate from entering the landfill. Wells are drilled with flares, and typically they don't burn right on top. They may put the flare off over here, but for the purposes of not showing a pipeline, we just put the flares right on top. Landfill gas is ideally pulled towards these flares, and the leachate drips down to the bottom where it's pumped out by the leachate removal well. In the Gear Road landfill, which is the landfill in question, was dug out in sections. So they called them, I believe, trenches. And they started with 2. These were dug out. They built up a soil stockpile. The first trench went beneath the groundwater level, so already you're going to have issues with leachate and direct contamination into the groundwater. The second hole was not dug as deep because it knew it was going to be used for cannery waste. And cannery waste is mostly liquid waste. I believe they had a fish cannery nearby, and this is where all of the disposal for that cannery went. So this trash was deposited by simply dumping it over the edge, and sometimes soil was added, sometimes it wasn't. They had issues with their soil stockpile running out, and so the trash was not covered after each day, and sometimes they'd go for longer periods without ever covering the trash. So the first trench was dug out, soil stockpile was moved, and a new trench was dug. And all the while the cannery waste is slowly being filled, as it was a dedicated landfill, I guess landfill trench, and the other landfill is just normal operations. There was one instance where one trench went significantly into the groundwater, and this was all green waste. I'm not sure what that means, but that was a term that the expert had used. And the last trench was dug. There were, I believe, more trenches in this, but they wanted to point out the 2 major issues, which was this green waste trench and the one that had just touched into it. And then on top of the cannery waste was just general refuse, and each of these trenches had received this dirt cap on top, but it did not receive any liner of any kind on the top or the bottom. So this allowed direct leaching straight into the groundwater below and into the vadose zone. They put in more monitoring probes. They put a bunch more trash on top of everything, and then one final cap of dirt. This was a very easy case to work with. The expert was very straightforward. His name was in the database. I do not recall it at this time. And yeah, they were very happy with the work we produced. Ben was the artist for this, and they had a very simple hand-drawn outline for us to work off of. And then they said we could, for the general landfill tutorial, we can just look up how any normal landfill should be constructed. There's lots of graphics on that online, so we went ahead and we made our own. Thank you, and goodbye.